Okay, good morning. My name is Nader Jallad. I am from Palestine. I am working as a head of environmental health division at Tul Karim Health Directorate, which belongs to the Ministry of Health. I'm going to talk about the problem of food safety in our country. So my study is about food safety practices of restaurant workers in Tul Karim district of Palestine. The underlying goal of this study was to prevent foodborne illness among restaurants customers, since studies show that foodborne illness is linked to eating outside the home, mainly in restaurants, for example. They also show that food handlers often do not handle food safely. So it is important to learn more about how restaurant workers prepare food. This can help us find ways to improve, their practices. Okay. To show the importance of this problem, globally, WHO estimates that foodborne and waterborne illnesses combined cause 2.2 million deaths, including 1.9 million children annually. And locally, we return to the epidemiology unit at Tul Karim Health Directorate. We found that 7 foodborne outbreaks were reported during the year 2016. And also, we returned to the file documentation of results of samples taken from restaurants during the period from January 2016 and until March 2017. At the Environmental Health Department, we found that the total number of samples that were sent for microbial testing were 264 samples, of which 31 were contaminated with different microorganisms. They were represented around 12% of the total samples. The objectives of this study were to identify factors related to food worker safety practices and to examine the relationships among restaurant hygiene policies, environmental factors, and food worker practices. This study was a cross-sectional observational study. It was carried out by environmental health inspectors of the Environmental Health Department. The study comprised all 217 restaurants located in the designated geographical area of Tul Karim district. The number of food handlers that were interviewed during this study were 367. The study was conducted between December 2016 until March 2017. Data collection, as we have said, carried out by environmental health inspectors. In each restaurant, the inspector first interviewed restaurant manager, owner, and employees to collect data on restaurant characteristics, worker characteristics, food preparation training and policies, manager qualifications, food preparation processes, and hand washing encouragement. Then the inspector conducted a 10 to 15 minutes observation of the kitchen to collect data, to collect information on the environment, such as the location and number of hand sinks with warm water, soups, towels, or hot air drying methods. Then the inspector conducted a 45 to 50 minutes observation of food handlers who were preparing food. During this observation, the inspector recorded data on specific activities that required hand washing according to the food code and hand hygiene behaviors associated with those activities. These activities can be shown in this table. These activities were driven from the food code. For the activities of food preparation and putting on disposable gloves for food preparation, hand washing should occur before each activity. For the other activities, preparing raw animal products, eating, drinking, using tobacco, coughing, sneezing, using tissue, handling dirty equipment, and touching body parts, hand washing should occur after each activity and before the beginning of another activity. With regard to data analysis focused on the proportions of all work activity in which hand washing occurred. For the purpose of this study, we focused on 2 hand washing measures. The first one is attempted hand washing, the other one is appropriate hand washing. Attempted hand washing defined as removing gloves worn and placing hands under running water. But appropriate hand washing defined as removing gloves worn and placing hands under running water, using soap, drying hands with paper, cloth towel, or hot air. We used also a multivariate logistic regression models to determine the combination of factors that best explain the hand hygiene practices. We used model for appropriate hand washing and another one for glove use. Also, we conducted t-tests to determine if there were any differences in hand washing practices by work activity type and the glove use. With regard to descriptive analysis of all restaurants, 217 restaurants, 92% of restaurants were independently owned and around 8% of restaurants were chains. With regard to the characteristics of food handlers, we can see here that around half of food workers, around 60 or exactly 46% of food handlers were younger, maybe less experienced people, aged 29 years old or less. And with regard to the educational level, we can see here that around 65% of the food workers were educated secondary education or less, which means the educational level was low in general in this study. With regard to activities of the observed workers engaged in a total of 1,283 activities falling into one of the defined activity categories. The most frequent activity, accounting for 34% of all activities, was handling dirty equipment. It followed by food preparation, 17%, putting on gloves for food preparation, 14%, and so on. With regard to hand hygiene, hand washing behaviors, workers attempted hand washing in 24% of all work activities, and workers washed their hands appropriately only in conjunction with 17% of all work activities, and wore gloves during 18% of all work activities. We found that in this study, appropriate hand washing varied by work activity type. Appropriate hand washing proportions were significantly larger before food preparation than in conjunction with any other activity. We found that also it was significantly larger before putting on gloves for food preparation than after handling dirty equipment, for example. And we can see that it was significantly smaller after touching body parts than in conjunction with any other activity. And as we have said, workers wash their hands appropriately only in conjunction with 17% of all work activities. Also, we found that appropriate hand washing varied by glove use. We found that appropriate hand washing proportions were significantly larger in non-glove work activities than in glove work activities. On the other hand, appropriate hand washing was more likely to occur in restaurants where there were multiple hand sinks and where a hand sink was in the observed worker's site, and it was less likely to occur when the workers were busy and when gloves were worn at the point at which hand washing should occur. Glove use were more likely to occur during food preparation than with the most of other activities. Glove use were more likely to occur in chain restaurants and in restaurants with the glove supplies in food preparation area, and it was less likely to occur when the workers were busy and during the activities with which workers washed their hands appropriately. Regarding management encouragement, we found only 3 restaurants, about 0.8 restaurants, had a defined policy with the clear written instruction concerning hand washing encouragement. And with regard to food safety training. Only 4% of the food handlers who were interviewed reported they had received food safety training, food safety and hygienic practices training. And during the observation, to assess how the food workers deal with cross-contamination prevention, about 38% of the food workers observed, changed, or washed the cutting board and knife that were used to cut raw animal meat and poultry before they used them to chop vegetables. And with regard to thermometer usage to check the temperature of cooked food, all the workers who were interviewed reported they didn't use the thermometer at all. Besides that, the percent of workers saying they had worked with vomiting and diarrhea was very small, 4%, but this number is still cause of concern. Sick workers can expose a lot of people to illness. We found in this study that rates of food worker hand washing and glove use were low in this study, suggesting that workers either do not know when to wash their hands or sometimes choose not to wash their hands. And both hand washing and glove use were related to activity type. Workers were more likely to wash their hands appropriately and wear gloves during food preparation than with the most of other activities. This finding suggests that at least some workers understand the need to protect food from hand contamination. And appropriate hand washing was positively related to two factors associated with restaurant hand sink, multiple hand sinks and hand sink in the worker's site. These factors contribute to sink accessibility, which likely promotes hand washing. And also we found that glove use was related to restaurant ownership. Glove use were more likely to wear in chain restaurants than independent restaurants. This finding suggests that glove use may be determined by restaurant management. And finally, glove use was related to glove accessibility. Gloves were worn more often when glove supplies were accessible in food preparation area. We concluded that a number of factors are related to hand hygiene practices like activity type, worker busyness, number and location of hand sinks, availability of supplies like warm water, gloves, soaps, towels, and restaurant ownership, and the relationship between the two prevention methods, hand washing and glove use. We recommended that restaurant management, food safety programs, and environmental health inspectors should cooperate together to improve the food preparation practices and restaurants and other similar retail food establishments through, for example, revising food preparation activities in order maybe to minimize the number of hand washing needed, and periodic medical checkups of food handlers, ensuring personal hygiene, and we suggested enrolling of new food handlers in obligatory training course should be adopted. Finally, I want to thank those who participated in this study and assisted in its completion, particularly those of the those employees in the environmental health department, the environmental health inspectors, and also special thanks to the director of Tulkarem Health Directorate, who motivated me and encouraged me to do such a research, and he also facilitates the occurrence of this project. And finally, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Nader, for this kind presentation. Yours floor, yes.
Excuse me, you mentioned that during 2017 or 16 you have 7 foodborne outbreaks.
Yes.
Just I want to know the source of these outbreaks. The second question, now when you observed the workers, before, did you introduce yourself to the workers? And if the answer is yes, do you believe that this affects the results?
Yes. With regard to the first questions, the food sources may be sometimes susceptible food, like hummus, for example, and sometimes it was happened through the cross-contamination between the ready-to-eat food and the raw materials, for example. It's something like that. This is regarding the source of the infection. Another question, the next question is about, I forget. Yes. No, the environmental inspectors, okay. The environmental inspectors can enter any premises, any restaurant premises at any time. So there is no need to define themselves. Yes.
Thank you very much. We must stop here to remain in the delay. We just have 15 minutes for the last presentation, which must include the presentation of the question. So thank you very much
Thank you.
for your contribution.